Unbothered. Chapter 1. Unbothered. Chapter 1. The Coffee Incident. The city was awake before the sun had fully committed to the day. Car horns screamed. Construction crews hammered away at concrete. Someone was arguing through a phone speaker loud enough for 3 city blocks to hear. A siren wailed in the distance. Chaos seemed to be everyone's morning routine. Connor Wentworth walked through it, all carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the expression of a man taking a leisurely stroll through paradise. At 42 years old, Connor had become an unusual sight, not because he was especially handsome, not because he was rich, not because he was famous. People noticed Connor because he looked completely unaffected by everything. The world could be on fire, and Connor would probably ask if anyone needed marshmallows. A man rushed around a corner and slammed directly into him. Coffee splashed across Connor's shirt. The man immediately pointed an accusing finger. "Watch where you're going." Connor looked down at the coffee stain, then at the man, then back at the stain. "I was." The man's eyebrows lowered. "Then why'd you hit me?" Connor shrugged. Gravity probably got involved somewhere. The man stared. Connor kept walking. The exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. 15 years ago, it would have lasted 3 hours. 15 years ago, Connor would have argued until one of them was exhausted. 10 years ago, somebody might have gotten punched. 5 years ago, Connor would have spent the rest of the day replaying the encounter in his head. Now? It wasn't worth carrying. Connor believed anger was like luggage. The heavier it was, the farther behind it left you. Unfortunately, younger Connor had traveled with enough emotional baggage to fill an airport. Back then, he got angry over everything. Traffic, customer service, slow internet, fast internet, rain, too much sunshine, the existence of Mondays. Once at a gas station, a stranger accidentally looked in Connor's direction for half a second too long. Connor immediately marched across the parking lot. "You got a problem?" The stranger blinked. "No." "Then why are you looking at me?" "I wasn't." "Yeah, you were." The stranger pointed. "I was reading the sign." Connor turned. Sure enough, there was a sign. It didn't matter. The argument lasted 20 minutes anyway. Looking back on it now, Connor laughed. At the time, he thought he was strong. What he really was fragile. Anyone could control his emotions. All they had to do was press a button. And Connor had buttons everywhere. The transformation began on a park bench. It was one of the worst weeks of his life. His relationship had ended. His car had broken down. His bank account looked like it was trying to disappear, and he was sitting alone feeding pigeons while feeling sorry for himself. That was when an older man sat beside him. The man wore simple clothes, nothing fancy, nothing expensive, yet he carried himself like someone who knew a secret. His name was J.A. Springs. Connor didn't know it then, but that conversation would alter the course of his life forever. J.A. looked at him. "What belongs to you that nobody can take?" Connor frowned. "My choices." J.A. nodded. "What controls your emotions?" "Me." "Who controls the weather?" "Nobody." "Who controls traffic?" "Nobody." "Who controls other people?" "Nobody." J.A. smiled. "Then why are you volunteering to be miserable?" Connor sat silently. The question hit harder than any insult ever had, because J.A. was right. Nobody had been making Connor miserable. Connor had been doing it himself, every day, every argument, every grudge, every moment spent dwelling on things he couldn't change. He had volunteered, and from that day forward, he resigned from the position. Years later, people still couldn't understand him. Especially Jasmine. Not because she disliked his calmness. She loved it, most of the time. The trouble was watching other people react to it. One afternoon they were walking through a shopping center when a man named Troy decided to test Connor's philosophy. Troy had a reputation. Loud, cocky, always looking for attention. The kind of man who mistook volume for confidence. As Connor and Jasmine passed, Troy smirked and smacked Jasmine on the backside. The entire sidewalk seemed to freeze. Jasmine stopped walking. Several strangers stopped walking. Everyone expected a fight. Troy definitely expected a fight. "What you gonna do about it?" he asked. Connor took a sip of lemonade. "Do about what?" "I just touched your girl." "Okay." Troy blinked. "You ain't mad?" Connor looked confused. "Why?" "Because I touched her butt." Connor thought for a moment. "That's all?" "Yeah." Connor nodded. "I touch her butt all the time." "What?" "You touched it once." Connor pointed at Jasmine. "I'm somewhere around 1,000. The crowd burst into laughter. "The score isn't close." Jasmine nearly spit out her drink laughing. Troy's face turned red. "You think you're funny." Connor smiled. "I know I am." The laughter got louder. Troy tried one final attack. "Man, I'm disrespecting you." Connor nodded thoughtfully. "That's a decision you're making." "What?" "Whether I feel disrespected is a decision I'm making." Troy stared. Connor stared back. Neither spoke. Finally, Troy shook his head. "You ain't normal." Connor grinned. "Thank you." Then he pointed at Jasmine. "That's the nicest thing you've said all day." As they walked away, Jasmine shook her head. "You know, most men would have fought him." Connor smiled. "Most men would have had a much worse afternoon, too." "What if he wanted a fight?" Connor shrugged. "Then he picked the wrong volunteer." Jasmine laughed all the way to the parking lot. What Connor didn't tell her was something J.A. Springs had taught him years ago. A man looking for a fight is usually fighting something inside himself. The easiest way to win is to never enter the ring. Unfortunately, life wasn't done testing Connor. Not even close. 3 days later, his boss called him into the office. And by lunchtime, Connor would be unemployed. Unbothered, Chapter 2. Congratulations, you're fired. Connor had been fired before. Technically. Once when he was 19 because he argued with a customer. Once when he was 23 because he argued with a manager. Once when he was 28 because he argued with both at the same time. Back then, getting fired felt personal, like an attack. Like someone had declared war on his future. Now it felt more like weather. Sometimes it rained. Sometimes it didn't. The key was remembering that neither situation lasted forever. That Wednesday morning started like every other. Connor arrived 30 minutes early. As usual, half the building was still asleep. The cleaning crew knew him by name. The security guard waved. "Morning, Connor." Connor smiled. "Morning, Frank." "You know normal people don't get here this early." Connor nodded. "I've heard rumors." Frank laughed. Connor headed upstairs. He loved routines, not because he needed them, because they made life easier. Less thinking, less stress, more living. He poured himself a cup of coffee, answered emails, finished reports, helped 3 co-workers solve problems they were being paid to solve themselves. Then, at exactly 11:43 a.m., his phone rang. His boss. Connor looked at the screen, smiled, and answered. "Congratulations." His boss paused. "What?" "I don't know why you're calling, but congratulations." His boss sighed. "Can you come to my office?" Connor stood. "That sounds less promising." The boss laughed despite himself. "Just come upstairs." "On my way." When Connor entered the office, he immediately noticed something. His boss looked nervous. Very nervous. The kind of nervous that suggested bad news. Connor sat down. His boss remained standing. That was clue number 2. Nobody stands for good news. His boss rubbed his forehead. Connor, yep, we're letting you go. Connor nodded. Okay. The boss blinked. That's it. Should there be more? The boss looked confused. You're taking this well. Connor smiled and I practiced. The boss stared at him. You're not upset? No. Not even a little? Connor thought about it. No. The boss looked disappointed, almost offended, like he had spent all morning preparing for a dramatic confrontation and now nobody was showing up. We're letting you go because we can't afford to keep you. Connor nodded. That sounds expensive. You show up early. True. You stay late. Also true. You're one of the hardest workers we've ever had. Connor smiled. Those sound like compliments. The boss groaned. They are compliments. Good. The problem is you're worth more than we can pay. Connor nodded. That's unfortunate. We can't give you the raise you deserve. Connor nodded again. Also unfortunate. So, the boss spread his hands. We're firing you. Connor leaned back in his chair. So instead of going broke paying me, yes, we're solving the problem by not paying me. Basically, Connor pointed. That's actually pretty logical. The boss stared. Why aren't you angry? Connor shrugged. Because I understand math. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, the boss laughed. Then laughed harder, then covered his face. This isn't how this conversation was supposed to go. Connor smiled. Most conversations improve when expectations leave. The boss shook his head. You're unbelievable. Connor stood. Anything else? His boss hesitated. Actually, yay. What are you going to do now? Connor looked genuinely confused. What do you mean? You don't have a job? Connor laughed. Oh. The boss blinked. Oh? Connor nodded. I started a company 3 years ago. Silence. What? Actually 2 companies. Silence. What? Maybe 3 if we're counting partnerships. The boss stared so hard he looked frozen. You own companies? Connor nodded. Sure. Then why are you working here? Connor answered immediately. The coffee. The boss laughed. Connor didn't. The boss stopped laughing. You're serious. Very. You worked here for free coffee? Connor thought about it. And the people? The boss dropped into his chair. You could have left any time. Yep. You didn't need this job? Nope. The boss stared at the ceiling, then at Connor, then at the ceiling again. Connor. Yeah. I don't know whether to admire you or be annoyed by you. Connor smiled. You can do both. By lunchtime, the entire office had heard the story. By 2 o'clock, it had become a legend. By 5 o'clock, half the building believed Connor secretly owned $1 billion empire. The truth was far less exciting, but only slightly. That evening, Connor arrived at his parents' house for dinner. His family gathered every Wednesday. No exceptions. Grandma Ruth believed missing family dinner was the first sign of civilization collapsing. Nobody wanted to test her theory. As soon as Connor walked through the door, his cousin Derek appeared. Derek looked alarmed. Is it true? Connor set down a bowl of macaroni. What part? You got fired. Technically. And you're smiling? Also technically. Derek looked exhausted. Man, what is wrong with you? Connor laughed. A lot of things. Be specific. The family gathered around. Everybody wanted details. His mother folded her arms. "Baby, are you okay?" "I'm fantastic." His father narrowed his eyes. "You sure?" Connor nodded. "Dad, if somebody takes away Plan A, you use Plan B. What if Plan B doesn't work?" "Then use Plan C." His grandmother pointed a fork at him. "And what if Plan C doesn't work?" Connor smiled. "I got 26 letters." Grandma Ruth laughed so hard sweet tea nearly came out of her nose. Across the room, his grandfather smiled proudly. Years ago, this same situation would have ended differently. Connor would have stormed into the house, complained for hours, blamed everyone, blamed management, blamed the economy, blamed politics, blamed the alignment of Jupiter. Now he simply ate barbecue and passed the cornbread. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Connor sat on his back porch. The stars stretched across the sky. The world was quiet. His phone buzzed. It was Jia Springs. Connor answered. "Hey, teacher. I heard you got fired." Connor laughed. News traveled fast. Apparently. "How do you feel?" Connor looked up at the stars. Grateful. There was silence. Then Jia chuckled. "Good answer." Connor smiled. "It wasn't always." "No," J.A. agreed, "it wasn't." Connor leaned back in his chair. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I spent years trying to control everything. And life kept proving I couldn't." J.I. laughed. "That's because life is a terrible employee. It refuses to take instructions." Connor laughed too. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Jia said something Connor would remember for the rest of his life. "Most people spend their lives trying to make the storm stop." Connor listened. "The wise ones learn how to dance in the rain." Connor smiled. "I think I'm finally learning." "No," Jia said. A gentle pride filled his voice. "I think you've finally learned." Connor looked out across the darkness. For the first time in years, there was no job waiting for him tomorrow. No schedule, no obligation, no certainty. Oddly enough, he had never felt more secure. What Connor didn't know was that by the end of the week, an event was coming that would test every lesson Jia Springs had ever taught him. And unlike Troy, or his boss, or the stranger with the coffee, this challenge wouldn't be funny. This challenge would change everything. Unbothered, Chapter 3, The Call at 2:17 a.m. At exactly 2:17 in the morning, Connor's phone rang. Most phone calls after midnight carried bad news. Everybody knew that. Connor knew it too. That was why he sat up before answering. Not because he panicked. Because experience had taught him that nobody calls at 2:17 a.m. to discuss the weather. The room was dark, silent. Beside him, Jasmine stirred slightly. Connor glanced at the screen. His smile disappeared. Not from fear, from concern. The caller was his mother. His mother never called this late. Ever. Connor answered immediately. "Mom?" For a moment there was only breathing. Then he heard her voice, and something was wrong. "Connor." The word sounded fragile, small, like it had been carrying weight. Connor sat fully upright. What happened? There was another pause, then 4 words. "Your grandfather collapsed." The room suddenly felt different. The darkness seemed heavier. The silence louder. Connor stood. Jasmine was awake now. She looked at his face. Immediately she knew. Something was wrong. Connor listened carefully as his mother explained. Ambulance, emergency room, doctors, tests, waiting. Nobody knew anything yet. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, Connor simply stood there. Jasmine walked over. "What's going on?" Connor took a breath. My grandfather. The words felt strange leaving his mouth. He collapsed. Jasmine immediately grabbed her keys. I'll drive. Within minutes they were on the road. Street lights flashed across the windshield. The city looked completely different at night. Empty. Quiet, almost thoughtful. For the first time in years, Connor found himself sitting with something unfamiliar. Not anger, not frustration, not annoyance. Fear. Real fear. The kind that arrives without permission. The kind that doesn't care how wise you are. Jasmine glanced over. You okay? Connor stared out the window. No. It was the first time she had heard him say that in years. You want to talk? No. You want silence? Please. She nodded. And gave him exactly that. Connor loved his entire family. But his grandfather was different. Grandpa Walter had been his hero long before J.A. Springs entered his life. When Connor was young, Grandpa Walter had taught him how to throw a baseball, how to change a tire, how to shake a man's hand, how to admit when he was wrong. Unfortunately, young Connor had ignored that last lesson for nearly 30 years. As the hospital came into view, another memory surfaced. He was 12 years old, standing beside his grandfather after losing a basketball game. Connor had been furious, complaining, blaming referees, blaming teammates, blaming everything. Grandpa Walter had listened patiently, then asked a question. What part was your fault? Connor remembered hating that question, mostly because he didn't have an answer. Now, 30 years later, he smiled, despite himself. Grandpa Walter and J.A. Springs had more in common than either of them realized. Both men believed responsibility was freedom. The car rolled into the parking lot. Jasmine parked. Neither moved immediately. Connor stared at the glowing hospital entrance. People walked in, people walked out, some crying, some smiling, some praying. Life and death sharing the same parking lot. Jasmine reached over and squeezed his hand. You don't have to be strong tonight. Connor looked at her. The words surprised him. Not because they were wrong, because he had never considered them. For years people assumed being unbothered meant being invincible. It didn't. Being unbothered wasn't pretending pain didn't exist. It was refusing to let pain become your master. Connor squeezed her hand back, then nodded. Let's go see Grandpa. As they walked toward the entrance, Connor remembered something J.A. Springs once told him. A lesson he had never fully understood. Until now. Peace is easy when nothing is being threatened. Wisdom begins the moment something precious is. Connor stepped through the hospital doors, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure what happened next.